Okay, here is our podcast on World War II. So, to start off, technically, World War II is going to start with what's called the Second Sino Japanese War. So, this is where Japan goes and invades China, and their goal is to create like this whole unified Pacific front. They're trying to show off how great they are. So, in 1931, they start expanding. They go take over Manchuria, which is part of China. They have a full scale invasion of China in 1937. Shanghai and Nanjing fall, and it's in by 37, and it's in Nanjing where like everyone in the world kind of becomes aware of what Japan's true intentions are. The Japanese use methods that are going to cause mass death, suffering. Like nobody is prepared for that. Nanjing at this point was the capital of China, so nobody expected this in a major capital, and it's what becomes known as the Rape of Nanjing or Nanking, depending on like which textbook. Like they're burning the homes. 400,000 people lost their lives due to the Japanese coming in and taking over the city. And so, like I said, this is Japan's pretty much their attempt to start taking over the Pacific. It came and caught people completely off guard. Then, shifting to Europe, you have your Allied powers against your Axis powers. So, you have Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union, who starts off as an Axis power and then switches later. Adolf Hitler of Germany, Tojo, who's the leader of the Japanese army, Hirohito, who's the emperor of Japan. You have Mussolini, who's in Italy. So you have all of these different people that ally themselves in Europe. Let me go hide that. Let me get that away. And so it all starts with Hitler starting to expand. You have the Munich Agreement, and all of this is from that video that we watched at the beginning of the week, where they give him the Sudetenland, which is this little area in Czechoslovakia that has all these Germans, it has all this coal, it has all these resources that he needs in order to fuel Germany's military machine. So this is in September of 1938. And this is kind of when he starts on the move, because by 1939, so September 1st, 1939, is like the date given to World War II in Europe, and that's when Germany invades Poland, and then they move on to France. So again, this was covered in the video where he comes in with like 1 million troops and just conquers Poland super, super quick. That same year, you had the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which was the treaty between Germany and the Soviet Union, where they weren't going to fight each other. They're going to split up Poland. Everybody's going to be happy. At least that was the plan. And then Hitler goes and like stabs everybody in the back, and that kind of defeats the purpose of what it was he was wanting to do. All right, so moving quickly through the war, Germany goes through and conquers France in 6 weeks. Then he turns his attention to Britain. Then you get the Battle of Britain, which we watched, where the Germans were hoping to defeat the English through their air attacks led by their Air Force, the Luftwaffe. If you want to know how to spell Luftwaffe, it's right there. That's when they start the Blitz and they start their bombing campaign. And then when they're not able to beat Britain into submission, what Germany is going to do is they're going to turn their attention to the Soviet Union. So the height of that is Operation Barbarossa. So that's Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. They don't like communists. They were just trying to keep Russia out of the war as long as they could so they could take over Europe, then turn their attention to Russia. I mean, they are pretty much going everywhere. Though the only problem is they don't expect to be in Russia during the winter. So like Napoleon, you have this failed invasion of Russia And that's what's going to help Russia. And then also the fact that in 1941, the United States is going to join the war because that's when the Japanese launched their attack on Pearl Harbor. Their hope was to destroy American naval capacity in the Pacific. Really didn't work because most of the really big ships, all the aircraft carriers, were out on maneuvers. So what they hoped to happen didn't happen, and it just, like I said, it brought the United States into the war, which nobody was really expecting at this point. So in the Pacific, Japan's entire goal is what's called Asia for the Asians. And this is this greater vision of what's called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity. And so basically they're just trying to get rid of areas like Singapore that were controlled by Western countries and put everything that dealt with Asia, the economy, everything in the hands of people from Asia. So it had to do with independence. I mean, we're still coming off of imperialism. You have this big nationalist push. So a lot of people in Asia are advocating for this. It really, really promotes nationalism. And so, as everything is going on, Japan is expanding in the Pacific. This is like the extent of what they've taken over. And then the focus of the Allies was to go take Europe back first. Then they focused on Japan. So D-Day was June 6, 1944, which was the invasion of France. It's the largest naval invasion in history. And once the Allies take back France, they start pushing east. The Russians are pushing west, and they meet in Berlin. And on May 8th, 1945 is technically the end of the war in Europe. So then everyone can focus their attention on Japan. And so the war in Asia is officially over August 15th, 1945. So August 6th, the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And so this is a picture of Hiroshima before the bomb and what it looked like afterward. I mean, it just completely flattens everything in a very tight radius. 3 days later, another one was dropped on Nagasaki. Russia then declares war on Japan, so that's what effectively ends the war in the Pacific, and then that ends World War II. And then the conferences after the war, which we'll get into next week, are what are going to set the stage for the Cold War. So I've covered everything that's on your quiz. You should pass. Study.